I remember that night like it happened just yesterday. A sweltering summer night in Nashville, the heat so thick it seemed to press down on everything, making the air heavy and suffocating. I stood on the front porch of our two-story suburban house, a half-finished glass of white wine in my hand, staring at my phone. A message sat there, unsent. Just 4 words. Please don't stop. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might tear through my chest. Cold sweat trickled down my spine. The last shred of reason inside me screamed, "What the hell are you doing, Jennifer?" But my fingers wouldn't listen. They trembled as I hit send. The message disappeared. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if maybe, if I didn't look, I could somehow undo it. But just seconds later, my phone buzzed. A new message. "I'm on my way." My knees nearly buckled, partly from fear, partly from the wild, reckless yearning I thought I'd lost somewhere around 35. I turned back inside, glancing around. The kitchen was spotless. The living room dark. Mark, my husband, was away on a business trip in Atlanta, like always. It was just me, and the silent walls, bearing witness to what I was about to do. I ran my fingers through my hair, quickly wiped away the smudge of mascara under my eyes. The clock on the wall ticked, each second like a hammer pounding against the chaos inside me. I heard the low rumble of an engine approaching. Headlights swept across the window. A black pickup truck slowly pulled into the driveway. I stepped outside, heart hammering against my ribs. He climbed out of the truck. Those eyes, deep, fierce, locked onto mine, promising both salvation and destruction. No words, no excuses. He strode toward me, lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing, and I heard myself whisper again, voice shaking, desperate. "Please, don't stop." He didn't stop. And from that moment on, my life was never the same. My name is Jennifer Collins. I'm 42 years old, living in the suburbs of Franklin, Tennessee, a place where every lawn is perfectly manicured, everyone smiles and waves on the street, and every secret is buried behind closed doors. From the outside, I was the woman everyone thought had it all. A 3-bedroom house with a wide porch, 2 grown children, and a successful husband in finance, Mark. We met when I was a 21-year-old fresh out of Vanderbilt. Mark was 8 years older, successful, steady, and the way he looked at me back then, like I was his whole world, pulled me into a life I thought I wanted. But time is a ruthless shapeshifter. After 2 decades, the passionate love we once had been replaced by busy schedules, clipped text messages, and weekends where Mark spent more time with his laptop than with me. I knew he wasn't a bad man. He was a good man, a kind father, a responsible husband. But sometimes, good isn't enough to save a heart that's slowly breaking. I tried to fill the loneliness in every way I could: yoga classes, church volunteering, even adopting a yellow lab rescue dog named Daisy. But when night fell, and I was alone in that too-big bed, the emptiness inside me would grow and spill over, wrapping itself around me like a cold blanket I couldn't escape. My friends, women in their 40s, some divorced, some quietly enduring loveless marriages, would whisper over Sunday brunch, "You have to save yourself. Don't let your life pass you by in regret." But I never thought I would actually do anything reckless. Until that night. The night I texted him, the only man who still saw me as a woman, not just a mother, a wife, or another piece of aging furniture in this house. Mark and I had once been the couple everyone envied. He was tall, polished, with a smile that could light up a crowded room. I was young, vibrant, always tucked under his arm like the perfect finishing touch to a beautiful picture. We used to spend weekends driving through Napa Valley, rainy nights curled up by the fire, listening to Bruce Springsteen sing about American dreams that never faded. But over time, the "I love you"s turned into "I'll be home late." Lingering kisses at the door became rushed hugs. Long conversations over dinner were replaced by endless conference calls. Mark wasn't a bad man. He never hit me. He never cheated. And maybe that's what made it worse. He was doing all the right things, paying the bills, attending parent-teacher meetings, remembering anniversaries with the appropriate gifts, but it all felt mechanical, like he was ticking off a checklist. There was a vast, invisible distance between us. Some nights, it felt like I was living with a polite roommate, not a life partner. I tried, I really did. I put on the short red dress he used to love. I cooked elaborate Italian dinners, lit candles, played soft jazz. But Mark would eat quickly, not a polite thank you, and then bury himself back in work. He didn't notice how my eyes slowly dried up from trying not to cry. He didn't see that my smile had become just another mask. I wanted to scream at him sometimes. Do you even see me anymore? I'm still here. I'm still waiting for you. But I stayed silent. Because the most terrifying thing isn't fighting for love. It's realizing the other person doesn't even think you're worth fighting for anymore. So when someone whose every glance, every gesture made me feel chosen, walked into my life, I couldn't fight it. I had been starving to be seen, to be wanted, to feel alive again. There's a moment I'll never forget, like a tiny cut that somehow slices all the way to the bone. It was a crisp autumn evening. Red leaves littered the front yard, and the air smelled sweet with wood smoke drifting from nearby houses. I was standing in the kitchen, wearing my favorite knit dress, stirring a pot of pumpkin soup from my mother's old recipe. I had hoped Mark would come home early, that he would notice, that he would say something, anything. But when he walked through the door, he just kicked off his shoes, brushed past me, and asked, "Is dinner ready yet?" No hug, no glance, no comment on the cozy little world I had tried to create. That night, we ate in silence, the only sounds the clinking of spoons against porcelain bowls. I wanted to cry, but the tears froze somewhere deep inside my chest. I told myself, he's just tired. It's work. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something slower, heavier. The slow death of something we once called love. I started waking up on those cold mornings without hoping for a sweet text from him. I stopped buying new lingerie, stopped spraying perfume on weekend nights. I moved through the days like a shadow, present, but not felt. My friends began to notice. At Sunday brunches, they'd give me these half-worried, half-pitying looks. "You doing okay, Jen?" they'd ask. And I would smile, a brittle smile that even I hated, and say, "I'm fine. Just a little tired." But the truth was, I was slowly dying inside. Not from fights, there weren't any. Not from bruises, there were none. But from indifference. From the kind of absence that can exist even when someone is sitting right across from you. And when a woman starts to feel invisible, that's when she's most vulnerable to falling. He came into my life so innocently, as easily as opening the wrong door and finding a whole new world behind it. His name was Daniel Reed, 45 years old, divorced, lived 3 blocks away in the same sleepy Franklin neighborhood. We met for the first time at the community gym one Saturday morning when I was struggling on the treadmill. I remember I had my headphones in, head down, silently cursing my racing heart. Daniel was on the machine right next to me. He smiled and gestured for me to take out my earbuds. When I pulled one out, he leaned over slightly and asked, "Training for a marathon or running from someone?" I laughed, a real laugh, the first one I'd had in what felt like weeks. He wasn't movie star handsome, no six-pack, no blinding white teeth, but there was something about Daniel that felt real. Warm. His deep brown eyes crinkled at the corners, not from age, but from laughing too much in his life. We started chatting every weekend, easy and harmless at first. Little conversations, the weather, the perpetually broken elliptical machine, the new coffee shop that had just opened on the corner. But slowly, the talks deepened. His divorce. The days I felt like a ghost in my own home. Daniel listened to me, really listened, in a way Mark hadn't for years. He remembered the little things, that I preferred cappuccino over lattes, that I was terrified of heights, that once, long ago, I had dreamed of being an artist before life steered me elsewhere. Every time I spoke to Daniel, I felt seen again, not as a mom of two or the wife of a banker, but as Jennifer, the woman who had once been filled with dreams and fire. One Saturday morning, I was fumbling with the treadmill strap, and Daniel leaned down to help me. His hand brushed against mine. Just a fleeting touch, but I felt the jolt all the way through my body. And I knew the danger had already begun. It didn't start with a stolen kiss or a whispered confession. It started with being understood, with being wanted. Something I had forgotten was even possible. At first, I told myself it was harmless fun. Who doesn't like a little attention? Who doesn't crave the feeling of being seen, even just a little? I told myself, I can control this. But feelings don't listen to logic. They seep in like water through cracked earth, slow, steady, unstoppable. I started caring more about how I looked when I went to the gym, choosing tighter tank tops, swiping on a tinted lip balm before I walked out the door. I surprised myself the way a single glance or a casual question from Daniel could make my heart skip. We started texting outside of the gym. At first, silly little things. Beautiful morning, huh? Just found out that muffin place you love is having a sale. But then the texts got longer, deeper. Daniel told me about his first night alone in his empty apartment, how the bed felt too big, too cold. I told him about the last time Mark had held my hand, 3 years ago, at a family gathering he hadn't even wanted to attend. We were building bridges we were never meant to cross. And I knew it. Every time Daniel's name flashed on my phone, a spark of excitement and guilt stabbed through my chest. Every time I saw, "Good night, Jen," my heart ached in a way it hadn't for a very, very long time. One morning, after finishing a workout, a soft rain started to fall. Daniel was waiting for me at the door, holding a navy blue umbrella. He handed the umbrella to me and then walked out into the rain himself. I stood there, gripping the umbrella handle tightly, watching the rain slide down his hair, and I felt something inside me break, a part of me so starved for kindness, for tenderness, that even the smallest gesture was enough to make me want to collapse. That day, for the first time, I admitted to myself, I wasn't just lonely. I was desperate to be loved. And Daniel, in his quiet way, was lighting up a part of my soul I thought had burned out long ago. It truly began on a Friday night, a night when I should have been home, watching a movie with Mark like every other middle-aged couple in the neighborhood. But Mark texted to say he'd be working late, yet another last-minute meeting, yet another urgent project. I stared at the empty chair at the dinner table, loneliness wrapping around me like a damp, heavy blanket. Daniel's text came like a warm breeze. "If you can't sleep, come out. I know a great place." I hesitated, told myself I should turn off the phone, lock the door, burrow under the covers like I always did. But instead, I threw on a thin sweater, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and stepped outside, my heart pounding so loudly I could almost hear it. Daniel was waiting for me in his old pickup truck, hazard lights blinking. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that wasn't urgent, wasn't demanding, just welcoming, warm enough to draw me in. We drove out of the neighborhood, past dark roads and fields that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Finally, Daniel pulled over by a small patch of grass by the lake, where the water gleamed like it had been dusted with silver. Neither of us spoke for a while. Only the soft lapping of water, the whisper of wind through the trees. Daniel sat quietly, turning to look at me, his gaze heavy with a question he didn't say aloud. "Do you want this?" I don't know who leaned in first, me or him. I only remember the warmth of his breath on my cheek, just before our lips met. The kiss wasn't urgent. It was a quiet claiming, an unspoken crossing of a line we could never uncross. I trembled, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming rush of guilt, yearning, and a nearly painful kind of release. Daniel whispered against my ear, like he was afraid to shatter the fragile moment. "I've been waiting for you longer than you think." We sat together under the moonlight, no promises, no future. Just that moment, two broken souls finding each other on a cold night. And I knew, from that second on, nothing would ever be the same again. After that night, it felt like a new chapter had opened, a chapter that belonged only to me and Daniel, separate from the normal life I was still desperately trying to maintain. We never went public. No crowded restaurants, no bustling coffee shops. Only hidden corners, an empty parking lot on the outskirts of town, an old rental cabin by the lake, or just the back seat of Daniel's truck parked under a thick canopy of trees, the sunshades pulled tightly shut. Every meeting was like willingly falling into a deep abyss. At first, it was hurried kisses, desperate embraces, as if trying to hold on to parts of each other. But quickly, it turned fiercer, more urgent, like we were fighting against time itself before it all crumbled. Daniel would send me short, coded texts. 10 minutes. Parking lot behind Home Depot. Cabin 7 is ready. That was enough. I would find a way to slip away from my schedule, postponing a Zoom meeting, stretching out a grocery trip, taking an extra-long stress relief walk. No one suspected a middle-aged wife in leggings and a hoodie, carrying a water bottle and a grocery bag. On the outside, I was still Jennifer, the devoted wife, the friendly neighbor. But inside Daniel's truck, in that tiny cabin that smelled of old wood, I became someone else entirely. Someone greedy, devouring every moment of skin on skin, every ragged breath, every muffled cry I couldn't hold back. Sometimes, resting my head on his chest after the feverish storm of us, I would faintly realize I was lost in a labyrinth I no longer wanted to escape. Daniel would stroke my hair, whispering sweet things like, "You deserve to be loved like this, Jennifer. I'll never stop unless you ask me to." But even those words made it hard for me to breathe. Because deep down I knew, the deeper I went, the less chance there was of finding my way back. Part of me already belonged to Daniel. But another part, the one still carrying Mark's last name, still wearing a wedding ring that glinted under the streetlights, was holding on by a thread. Every time I left Daniel, I would stare at myself in the bathroom mirror, seeing red-rimmed eyes and swollen lips, asking myself, who am I now? And what am I doing to my life? I couldn't avoid facing myself each time I returned to the quiet house where Mark waited for me. That feeling, it didn't even have a name. A deep sadness, a vague, creeping fear of the truth I had been trying so hard to ignore. In the days after each meeting with Daniel, I felt more and more like a stranger to myself. The reflection in the mirror was no longer the Jennifer I knew, the loving wife, the caring mother who once dedicated herself entirely to her family. Instead, I had become a woman drowning in guilt, someone who kept trying to soothe the pain with escapes that were never enough. I remember clearly the first time Daniel held me after we had just surrendered to that burning passion. He didn't say a word, he just held me tight, as if he didn't want me to go anywhere. I could feel his heartbeat pounding against my back, and in that moment, I realized my own heart was beating to a completely different rhythm. When he whispered into my ear, "Don't ever think you're not worthy, Jennifer. I will never stop," I felt myself being pulled into a deep abyss with no way out. And then I would return to Mark, sitting beside him, eating dinner, chatting about upcoming plans. But every time I looked into his eyes, I felt as if I were betraying him, betraying the very moments we had once shared together. I realized I was no longer the wife he loved. I couldn't tell him what had happened, because deep down I knew it would destroy everything, not just our family, but me too. I kept living in the fading shadow of a relationship that had long since stopped being perfect. I couldn't shake Daniel from my mind. Every time I saw Mark, I thought of him, the feel of his hands brushing my skin, the promises I never truly wanted to keep. I knew it, but refused to admit it, that I was standing at a crossroads, between two lives, between two men. I no longer knew what I could hold onto anymore. The only thing I knew for sure was, I had already lost myself. Each night, lying down in bed, I could still hear Daniel's whispers in my head, while Mark's innocent gaze, still so trusting, pierced through me. I wanted to cry, but I didn't even know what I was crying for. Was it because I had fallen in love? Or because I had hurt the one person who still truly loved me? That night, I came home late, doing my best to hide the storm inside me. Mark was already lying on the bed, clutching a pillow, eyes glued to his phone. He didn't look up when I entered, but I could feel the strange tension hanging heavy in the air. I changed clothes, washed my face, and quietly lay down beside him. I knew he was awake, knew he was waiting for an explanation I couldn't give. Neither of us said a word. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock. And then, Mark's phone suddenly vibrated, lighting up with a name I never expected to see, Daniel. I stared at him, feeling time grind to a halt. Mark didn't give me a chance to react. Slowly, he picked up the phone, read the caller ID, and turned his gaze toward me. No anger, no outrage, just a silence that told me he already understood everything. "Jennifer," Mark said, his voice dry and cold, "did you really think you could hide this from me forever?" My whole body trembled. The wave of guilt rose so high I couldn't do anything but stand there and face the truth. The story I had spent so long trying to bury had finally been dragged into the light, like a wound that could never heal. Mark didn't need any more explanations. He set the phone down, got up, and turned his back to me. "You can lie to me, Jennifer," he said, his voice breaking as if it hurt just to say the words, "but you can't lie to yourself." The whole room froze over. Even my sigh was enough to shatter all the feelings I had tried so hard to suppress. I wanted to say something, to explain, but any words I tried to form would have been meaningless. All I could do was stare at his back, the back of the man I had once promised to love forever. Mark turned to look at me one more time, and this time there was no forgiveness in his eyes, only a deep, profound disappointment. "I know everything, Jennifer," he said. "I saw the calls. I know who you've been meeting." A suffocating silence fell between us. Mark sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at me with eyes that no longer held any trace of hope. "So what exactly do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice raw, each word like a punch to my chest. "Do you even realize you're destroying everything we built together?" I couldn't answer. I could only feel the pain in every word he spoke, because I knew this time there was no way back. "Jennifer, do you really think we can just keep going like this?" Mark didn't shout, but the disappointment, the devastation in his voice, weighed heavier than any scream. He looked at me as if I were a complete stranger, and I felt myself shattering piece by piece. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to beg for forgiveness, but all I could do was stand there in silence. Because deep down, I knew no apology could ever fix this. I had betrayed him. I had betrayed myself. And now there was nothing left but the brutal truth. Mark stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the night as if searching for an escape. "You destroyed my trust," he said without turning around. "How am I supposed to trust you again?" That was the one question I couldn't answer. How could I convince him that I wasn't the woman he now saw before him? How could I undo a mistake so enormous, so devastating? "I gave you everything," Mark continued, his voice icy cold. "And yet you went looking for it in someone else. For what? To feel loved? To feel like you were still desirable?" Guilt and regret tangled inside me, but I couldn't resist. Every word he said landed like a hammer blow to my heart. I wanted to fight back, to explain, but I knew anything I said would be meaningless. Because I had hurt him, and that was unforgivable. "You don't know what you've done," I whispered, my lips dry. "I don't even know how I got so lost." Mark turned to me, and this time, his eyes weren't angry. They were filled with pure, overwhelming disappointment. He didn't need me to explain. He had seen enough. "You don't have to say anything else," he said, and I heard the finality in his voice. "We're done here, Jennifer." And when he said that, it felt like the whole world collapsed around me. I wanted to scream, to beg, but all I could do was watch him, watch the man I once loved more than life itself, turn away and walk out of the room. I could feel each step he took pulling him further away from me, maybe forever. And in that moment, I realized I had lost everything. Mark had been gone for a long while, but I was still sitting there, staring at the empty space he left behind. Everything around me blurred into nothingness, leaving only me, alone, in a cold and empty room. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. I wanted to gather myself, to find a shred of calm, but I couldn't. I had destroyed everything with my own hands. In the thick silence, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. I didn't open it right away, but I knew exactly what he would say. He was always the same, always finding ways to pull me back to him, even when I knew deep down what we had was wrong. But then I wondered, could I really live without him? Could I simply walk away from the feelings he stirred inside me? At that moment, I felt myself standing at a crossroads. I couldn't go back to Mark, I knew that much. He had seen everything. The trust between us had shattered beyond repair. I couldn't make him love me again. I couldn't hope for forgiveness I didn't deserve. But I couldn't turn my back on Daniel either. It felt like my heart was split in two. Daniel gave me feelings I had never experienced. He made me feel wanted, desired, alive. But could I keep living with this guilt? Could I survive a relationship built on something so wrong? I looked at the phone again, feeling an almost unbearable pull. But then, in that very instant, I realized something even more important than love or passion. I had lost myself. Part of me wanted to text Daniel back, to keep chasing the fleeting feeling he gave me. But another part, the part one had buried for so long, pulled me toward the truth. I needed to stand on my own. I needed to take back my life, not live it depending on anyone else. I had once thought I couldn't live without him, but now I realized I had to live for myself. In the end, I chose not to reply to Daniel. It didn't mean I had forgotten him. It meant I had decided not to let myself fall any deeper into temptation. I stared at the phone one last time and pressed delete. I didn't know if it was the right decision, but I knew it was mine. And no matter what happened, I would have to face the consequences on my own. A few hours later, I found Mark sitting out on the balcony, silently staring into the night. I couldn't guess what he was thinking, but I knew one thing. If I had any chance of making things right, it had to start with me. I couldn't fix our relationship right away, but I couldn't keep running anymore either. I walked over to Mark and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. There were no words needed. We had been through too much to pretend otherwise. The next morning, everything felt different. Mark was still silent, not the silence of anger, but the silence of someone who had lost all trust and didn't know what to do anymore. He didn't speak to me the way he used to, and I could feel the distance growing, like a wall quietly building between us. I knew my decision hadn't been easy, but I also knew I couldn't go back to the mistakes I had made. Erasing Daniel from my life was just the first step, but deep down I understood getting rid of him didn't mean I had fixed everything. I had betrayed Mark, and even if I never saw Daniel again, the shadow of that betrayal would always linger between us. Every morning, I woke up next to Mark, but the feeling between us had changed. He still treated me with a kind of polite friendship, but not with the love we once shared. We still ate meals together, but the silence weighed heavier than any words ever could. There were no more playful conversations, no more warm evenings spent side by side. It all felt like memories, distant, unreachable. Mark didn't say it out loud, but I could see it in his eyes. He no longer looked at me with the same trust. Instead, I saw a deep disappointment, one that I knew I could never erase. He still lived in the house, but we were no longer a family. We weren't partners sharing a life anymore. We were two people merely trying to coexist under the same roof. Even though I had chosen not to answer Daniel, I couldn't fully escape the consequences of my actions. The pain of losing Mark's trust was sharper and more devastating than any fleeting emotion I had ever felt with Daniel. The guilt clung to me every day, and I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo the damage I had done. Day after day, I faced the coldness within me. It wasn't the chill of the house, but the chill inside my heart, a heart that was once full of love, now left hollow and empty. And in a single moment, I realized that the decision I had made wasn't an end, but a beginning of emotions that couldn't be soothed, of broken relationships, and of a life I would have to figure out how to live without the things I once loved. A week had passed since I decided to end everything with Daniel, and since then, I had never felt more like a stranger to myself. It wasn't because I lacked anything, but because I was beginning to truly feel the reality. I could no longer live in the shadow of my own mistakes. That feeling, that suffocating guilt, clung to me like a ghost I couldn't escape. Mark and I no longer had the conversations we once did, but I knew he was still watching me. Every time I looked back at him, I saw the weariness in his eyes, the disappointment. He no longer looked at me as the wife he once loved, but as a woman who had hurt him too deeply. We didn't speak about it, but it was there, a crack that kept widening between us. And yet, something strange was happening inside me. I had thought that after everything shattered, I would feel empty, as if I'd lost a vital part of my life. But instead, I felt a strange sense of release. I no longer lived in conflict between what I wanted and what I knew was right. I didn't have to lie to myself anymore. I had made mistakes, and now I was facing them. It didn't mean I stopped loving Mark or that I no longer grieved for what we once had. But I realized love isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. I couldn't force him to come back to me, couldn't pretend everything was the same. If our relationship had any chance of healing, it would take time, patience, and above all, the rebuilding of trust that wouldn't be easily given back. I began spending time finding myself again. I returned to old hobbies, old habits I'd abandoned while trying to please everyone around me. It felt different, a kind of freedom, but also a deep loneliness. Not the loneliness of being without someone, but the loneliness of learning to love myself, and sometimes that's far harder than anything else. I no longer hoped for miracles, no longer believed that everything would magically go back to the way it was. But I was beginning to understand something important. Change doesn't always come from saving a relationship. Sometimes it comes from accepting change within ourselves. I understood that I needed to learn to forgive myself before I could ever hope for forgiveness from anyone else. And no matter how hard it was, I had to continue living a new life, a new chapter, without Daniel, and without the mistakes that had defined me for too long. I would start over from within. Everything had changed. But maybe change doesn't always mean things get better. Sometimes, it just makes things messier, harder. I had found a piece of peace within me, but the price was the shattering of everything I once thought was whole. Mark and I still lived together, but we were no longer the happy couple we used to be. There were no longer intimate moments, no more playful conversations. We lived in a quiet space, as if we were both trying to avoid confronting the emotions left unresolved. Every day, I faced a man I had once loved so deeply, but now he was someone who could no longer look at me without disappointment. Our relationship wasn't exactly over, but it wasn't a new beginning either. We were stuck in this in-between space, unable to move forward, unable to go back. Sometimes I wondered if we would ever find our way back to love, or if this was all just a game of time, clinging to a past that could never return. Mark hadn't left me, but he couldn't love me the way he used to either. The way he looked at me had changed, no longer with affection, but with caution and doubt. He wasn't afraid that I would betray him again. He was afraid he might never be able to trust me again. The deep wounds I had caused him couldn't be erased with apologies. Our relationship had been torn apart, and no matter how much we tried to stitch it back together, it could never be exactly the same. I realized I couldn't wait for a miracle to fix everything. We couldn't go back, but that didn't mean we had to give up. Maybe we would never return to the sweetness we once had, but I didn't want to let go completely. I knew love isn't always perfect, but I still wanted to try, to find a new way to live beside each other, even if it would never feel whole again. And I also realized that in life, there are relationships that can't be salvaged, mistakes that can't be undone, and sometimes, all that remains are the lessons and the memories. We couldn't go back. But I hope that even if we could never love each other the way we once did, we could still live alongside each other with empathy and respect. After all, sometimes love isn't about what we lost. It's about learning to live with what remains. There were mornings when I would wake up, look out the window where the soft sunlight touched the quiet trees of our neighborhood, and feel lighter than I had in a long time. No more secret messages. No more lies to cover up an ugly truth. The truth had been exposed. Everything had exploded. And in the ashes, amidst all the pain, I found a sliver of freedom. I no longer had to pretend to be the perfect wife while my heart was in chaos. I no longer had to live two lives. Even though Mark and I were now like two silent companions, at least I was living honestly. It was a freedom I never thought I'd have, and it came at a devastating cost, the cost of trust, love, and the perfect family image I once cherished so much. But there were still nights when the house fell into deep silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. The walls and the heavy sound of Mark's breathing beside me made my heart tighten once again. I missed the old days, the evenings filled with laughter in our tiny kitchen, the long drives just to discover a new, quirky restaurant. I missed the way he used to hug me from behind while I cooked, missed the way he looked at me as if I were his whole world. And I understood then, some losses can never be repaired. Regret. Such a simple word, yet it carries an unbearable weight. I regretted letting my heart drift away. Regretted trading something genuine for a fleeting rush of emotion. Daniel gave me a kind of thrill I thought I needed, but in the end, what I lost was the most precious thing of all, the trust of the man who had chosen to stand by me for nearly 2 decades. Now, I'm learning to live with the coexistence of freedom and regret. I don't deny what happened, nor do I torture myself endlessly over it. I just know that from here on out, every step I take must be more carefully considered. And that sometimes, the biggest lessons in life come from the most painful mistakes. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe we'll find something again, or maybe we'll quietly let go when we no longer have the strength to hold on. But either way, I will never forget this feeling, the feeling of losing a part of myself in order to reclaim another part, and having to learn to forgive myself before hoping for forgiveness from anyone else. From everything that happened, I've realized a truth that many people spend a lifetime trying to understand. One moment of weakness can destroy a love that took years to build. I used to believe that if you loved each other enough, if you stayed connected long enough, nothing could tear you apart. But love, like a house, doesn't just need time to build, it needs daily protection against the storms that rage inside each of us. Even a tiny crack, one brief moment seeking excitement, one indulgence of the ego, can be enough to bring the whole structure crashing down. I also realized that in marriage, listening and understanding must be tended to like breathing, not just during the good times, but through the dullness, the struggles, and the hurt. If I had been brave enough to open my heart to Mark about what I was lacking, instead of seeking comfort elsewhere, maybe things would have been different. Maybe we would have hurt together, but at least together. The most heartbreaking part wasn't being betrayed. It was realizing I chose betrayal when I still had the chance to save us. I was the one who hurt the person I once promised to protect, love, and cherish. And whether or not Mark can ever forgive me, the true forgiveness I must confront is forgiving myself, something far harder than anything else. Here's what I've learned. Backhand index pointing right. No one can fill the emptiness inside you except yourself. Backhand index pointing right. No fleeting passion is worth more than the steady trust you build over years. Backhand index pointing right, and some mistakes will forever leave scars, reminding you every day of what you lost in just one moment of weakness. If I could go back, I would choose to face the loneliness, face the struggles in our marriage, rather than run into someone else's arms. But I can't go back. All I can do is move forward, carrying this heavy but necessary lesson for the rest of my life.